The soft chime of the executive elevator often signaled the arrival of power at Sterling Trust Bank, but today, as the doors parted to reveal Dr. Anya Sharma, it felt more like the opening of a stage for a high-stakes drama. Her heels clicked with deliberate cadence across the polished marble, each echo through the cathedral-like lobby amplifying the suffocating tension in the air. Security guards averted their gazes, tellers whispered behind bulletproof glass, and the very atmosphere hummed with an almost palpable anticipation. Dr. Sharma, CEO, carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced storms that would have shattered lesser souls. Her navy blazer bespoke authority without ostentation, her natural hair pulled back in a professional, unapologetically authentic style. In her worn leather portfolio, a keepsake from her late father lay more than documents. It held the weight of every slight, every microaggression, every moment she had been underestimated because of her identity. The brass nameplate by the executive elevator declaring Dr. Anya Sharma, Chief Executive Officer, felt as fragile as spun glass today, a title about to be put to the ultimate test. The 92nd end to the 32nd floor offered Anya a mere breath to steel herself for the battlefield that awaited, a boardroom brimming with men who believed they already held all the cards, their judgment rendered long before she arrived. As the doors opened directly into the executive suite, hushed conversations abruptly ceased. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched, a testament to ambition. Yet within this glass cage, the only thing stretching was the oppressive silence that greeted her. "You don't belong in our boardroom, Dr. Sharma." Chairman Arthur Caldwell's voice cut through the stillness like a blade, his words loaded with implications far beyond professional disagreement. It was a declaration of war, veiled in corporate courtesy. Anya offered nothing more than a slight smile, the kind that always unsettled powerful men because they couldn't read it, categorize it, or control it. She took her seat at the head of the dark mahogany table, which more closely resembled a men's club than a modern financial institution, with the calm assurance of someone privy to a secret. Her simple charcoal suit, less expensive than most watches around the table, was a deliberate choice. Her mere presence already threatened these men, so she saw no need to amplify it with displays of wealth. The board members barely acknowledged her. Chairman Caldwell, a silver-haired titan whose family had controlled Chicago banking for 3 generations, continued a conversation about golf handicaps with CFO David Grant. Grant, younger but no less entitled, sported a Bermuda tan. Risk Management Director Robert Miller shuffled papers with the exaggerated importance of a man mistaking busy work for actual work. "Gentlemen," Anya's voice, accustomed to commanding rooms, cut through the pretense. "Shall we begin?" Grant glanced pointedly at his Rolex. "We were actually discussing the quarterly projections before you arrived." The implication was clear. Her time was less valuable, her presence an interruption. Anya, with economical and precise movements, opened her briefcase and removed a tablet. "Then you'll be pleased to hear we've exceeded projections by 18%, she announced, swiping to display the numbers on the room's mounted screen. "Customer satisfaction is at a 20-year high, and our community lending initiatives have generated both significant goodwill and unexpected profit streams." Miller didn't look up. "Those numbers are interesting, though I wonder about sustainability." His tone implied the success under her leadership was not just questionable, but somehow illegitimate. Caldwell leaned back, studying Anya with the intensity of a predator. "Success is about more than numbers, Dr. Sharma. It's about fit, culture, understanding the values that built this institution." The words hung like smoke, a familiar coded language Anya had heard throughout her career. Subtle suggestions that she didn't quite understand how things work here, that her achievements were less earned than those of her white colleagues. Reaching for her phone, Anya discreetly activated a voice recording app. In her notebook, she meticulously noted the time and date, beginning a record that would prove more valuable than anyone in this room could imagine. "I'm curious about these values," she said, her voice steady as silk. "Could you elaborate on what makes someone a good cultural fit for Sterling Trust?" The question shifted the room's uncomfortable energy. Grant's fingers drummed. Miller finally looked up. Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. They didn't know Anya had been documenting every interaction, every slight, every moment of disrespect for the past 6 months. They didn't know that patience was not weakness, and silence was not consent. What they didn't know was about to destroy them. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted again, like weather before a storm. Grant slid a manila folder across the table. We've received some concerns about your leadership approach. Anya's eyes scanned the anonymous complaints, disguised as performance concerns. Too aggressive in meetings, doesn't collaborate well with established team members, brings politics into business decisions. Her pulse quickened, but her composure held. These are interesting, she said, closing the folder with deliberate calm. Anonymous feedback is always challenging. Could you provide specific examples so I can understand how to improve? Miller leaned forward, finally engaged. Well, there's the diversity hiring initiative you implemented without board approval. Some people feel it's divisive, focusing on race rather than qualifications. The accusation landed like a slap. Anya had heard the song before. Promoting equality somehow diminished merit. Diversity meant abandoning standards. You mean the initiative that increased our talent pool by 40% and brought in candidates with degrees from Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford? The same initiative that correlates directly with our improved performance metrics? Caldwell waved a dismissive hand. It's not about the numbers, Dr. Sharma. It's about whether someone understands our culture, whether they fit with the families who've banked with us for generations. Families like the Fitzgeralds? Anya countered, referencing one of the bank's oldest clients. They specifically praised our new customer service representative, Elena Rodriguez, in a letter to your office last month. Said she provided the best service they'd experienced in decades. Grant's jaw tightened. This isn't about individual cases. It's about the bigger picture. The board feels that some of your decisions prioritize social messaging over sound banking principles. Social messaging. The phrase hung like an accusation, code for any initiative acknowledging systemic inequality. Her community lending programs, diverse hiring, inclusive policies, all reduced to this by men mistaking privilege for expertise. She glanced at her phone, confirming the recording was active. In her notebook, she wrote, 3:47 p.m., social messaging, comment, Grant. I'd like to understand what sound banking principles I violated, she said, her voice carrying just enough edge. Our loan default rates are the lowest in 5 years. Customer retention is up 23%. We've expanded into 3 new markets successfully. Which principle exactly concerns you? The ensuing silence was pregnant with unspoken truths. These men cared not for banking principles, but for power, control, and maintaining a system that served them. Anya's success threatened not just their positions, but their worldview. Miller shuffled his papers again. It's not any one thing. It's a pattern, a sense that perhaps your priorities don't align with our traditional approach. Traditional approach, Anya repeated, letting the words hang. She knew exactly what tradition they were protecting. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Outside, Chicago bustled, but inside something darker was taking shape. Caldwell stood, his movement deliberate, theatrical. Dr. Sharma, he began, his voice carrying the weight of finality. The board has made a decision regarding your position with Sterling Trust Bank. The words hung like an executioner's blade. Every eye was on her, waiting for tears, pleading, or weakness. Instead, she straightened, her spine turning to steel. We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately. Caldwell turned from the window, his pale blue eyes cold. This institution was built on certain values, family values, traditional values, values that have served us well for over 70 years. Grant slid another folder across the table. Your severance package is quite generous considering the circumstances. We're prepared to provide 6 months' salary and a neutral reference, provided you sign the non-disclosure agreement. Anya knew it was hush money, a golden gag. The circumstances, she repeated, tasting the euphemism. Could you elaborate on what circumstances justify terminating a CEO who has delivered record profits and customer satisfaction? Miller shifted uncomfortably. It's not about numbers, Dr. Sharma. It's about leadership style, cultural compatibility. The board feels that your approach doesn't align with our institutional values. Institutional values, Anya echoed, her voice steady. Such as? The question created a moment of visible discomfort. Caldwell, now sharp with irritation, returned to his seat. Loyalty to tradition, respect for established practices, understanding that some methods of doing business have worked for generations and don't need to be modernized for the sake of political correctness. The mask was slipping. Dr. Sharma, Grant said, leaning forward with what he likely thought was a paternal expression. You're a bright woman. You have talents, but perhaps you'd be more comfortable at an institution that's more aligned with your particular perspective. The condescension dripped like poison. The suggestion was clear. Go find somewhere more suitable for your kind. Anya reached into her purse, pulling out her corporate credit card, building access card, and company laptop. She placed them on the table with the precision of a chess player. I understand, she said, an undertone making Caldwell's eyes narrow. Before I leave, I need to ensure that all proper protocols are followed. I assume you'll want a complete transition of my responsibilities and thorough documentation of all ongoing initiatives. Miller waved a dismissive hand. The board will handle the transition. We don't need. Oh, but you do, Anya interrupted gently, her smile sharp as a blade. Federal banking regulations require complete documentation of executive transitions. I'm sure you wouldn't want any regulatory complications. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Anya sent a simple text message. It's time. She looked around the table at these men who thought they'd won. They believed they'd successfully removed a threat to their comfortable order. What they didn't understand was that some battles are fought in boardrooms, but wars are won in courtrooms. Caldwell signaled someone outside. 2 security guards, both white, both built like former football players, appeared. Gentlemen, Caldwell said, his voice theatrical, please escort Dr. King Sharma from the building. Ensure she doesn't access any computers or files on her way out. The word escort carried implications that tightened Anya's jaw. That won't be necessary, Anya said, rising with fluid grace. But I do need to complete the regulatory documentation before I leave. Federal banking law requires. Federal banking law, Grant interrupted with a laugh. That's purely something we're quite familiar with, Dr. Sharma. We've been complying with regulations since before you were born. The comment, aimed at her age and newcomer status, hit its target. But Anya's smile didn't waver. Of course, she said, reaching for her briefcase. Though I'm curious, which of you will be taking responsibility for the Fitzgerald account during the transition? The question created confused silence. The Fitzgerald account represented $30 million in assets, a complex trust Anya had personally managed for 2 years. Miller frowned. The Fitzgerald account will be managed by our existing trust department. Interesting, Anya said, a note of concern making Caldwell's eyes narrow. Because the Fitzgerald Trust has specific requirements about executive oversight. Mrs. Fitzgerald was quite clear that any change in management structure would trigger a complete portfolio review. The silence that followed was different now, less triumphant, more uncertain. The Fitzgerald account wasn't just money. It was connected to other high-net-worth clients who chose Sterling Trust specifically because of Anya's reputation and expertise. Grant's confident expression began to crack. We'll handle the transition appropriately. I'm sure you will, Anya said, her tone suggesting otherwise. Though I should mention that the Gupta Group, the Davies Family Trust, and the Lee Foundation all have similar provisions. They may want to discuss the leadership changes personally. Each name represented millions in assets and clients who sought out an institution led by someone who looked like them, who understood their experiences as successful minorities. Caldwell's face showed the first signs of real concern. Dr. Sharma, are you threatening us? Threatening? Anya's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. I'm simply ensuring proper client communication during a leadership transition, but surely that's what you'd want. Even as she spoke, her phone buzzed. Word was spreading through Chicago's tight-knit banking community. The security guards shifted uncomfortably, unsure of their role in what was now less a removal and more a negotiation. Perhaps, Anya said, checking her phone with deliberate casualness, we should discuss this transition more carefully. After all, we wouldn't want any misunderstandings to affect the bank's reputation. The word reputation hung in the air like a direct threat. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. The boardroom's glass walls, meant for transparency, now served as a fishbowl. Employees on the 32nd floor gathered in clusters, hushed conversations, frequent concerned glances. Emily Wong, the bank's HR director, appeared at the door, her usually composed demeanor strained. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, carefully controlled, "I need to speak with you immediately about proper procedures for executive transitions." The interruption irritated Caldwell. "Mrs. Wong, this is a board matter. Please return to your office." But Emily didn't move. Instead, she placed a tablet on the table showing a legal document. "Sir, I've been in contact with our employment counsel. They strongly advise that any executive termination be reviewed for compliance with. We don't need legal advice for a straightforward termination." Grant snapped, his composure cracking. "Dr. Sharma's employment is at will. We can terminate her for any reason or no reason." The statement hung like a confession. Emily's eyes widened, glancing at Anya with alarm. Any reason or no reason, in the context of terminating the bank's first black CEO, carried implications no competent HR director wanted to touch. Through the glass walls, the gathering crowd of employees grew. Many were people Anya had hired, diverse young professionals who saw Sterling Trust as progressive under her leadership. Their faces showed confusion, concern, and growing anger. Lucas Morales, a rising star in commercial lending, approached the glass and made eye contact with Anya. His expression was disbelief. When he pulled out his phone, Anya knew the news was about to explode across social media. "Mrs. Wong," Anya said, cutting through the mounting tension, "I appreciate your concern for proper procedures. Perhaps you could explain to the board the bank's policy regarding discrimination in employment decisions." The question was a landmine disguised as a request. Emily looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "The bank's policy," she said carefully, "strictly prohibits discrimination based on race, gender, age, or any other protected characteristic. All employment decisions must be based on legitimate business reasons and documented accordingly." Caldwell's face darkened. "This termination is based entirely on performance and cultural fit." "Cultural fit," Emily repeated, unable to keep the concern from her voice. Those words were radioactive in employment law, too often a euphemism for discrimination. Outside, phones were openly in use. Anya saw employees texting, posting, calling. # Sterling Trust CEO was likely trending. Grant noticed the crowd and stood abruptly. "This is becoming a circus. Security, clear that area immediately." But the order worsened things. Security guards moving toward concerned employees made the optics undeniable. This was not routine. Anya watched the chaos with the calm of someone who had anticipated every move. Her phone buzzed with messages. Her network was activating, her allies mobilizing. "Gentlemen," she said, cutting through the noise, "I think we should discuss this more carefully. After all, you wouldn't want this to become a public relations nightmare." The situation spiraled. Carlos Ramirez, a senior loan officer and one of Anya's key hires, pushed through the crowd. He was a young Latino banker who had brought in more new business in 2 years than some veterans managed in a decade. "Dr. Sharma," he called through the glass, his voice clear. "Is it true they're terminating you?" Absolute silence. This was the tipping point. Caldwell's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is a private meeting," Miller shouted, gesturing frantically at the guards. But Carlos didn't move. He was joined by Hannah Lee from Trust, Benjamin Carter from Commercial Real Estate, and Dr. Lena Khalil from International Banking. All high performers, all people of color, all understanding that if Anya could be removed, none of them were safe. "Sir," Carlos said, steady but urgent, "we need to understand what's happening. Dr. Sharma has been the best CEO this bank has ever had. Our numbers prove it." Grant slammed his hand on the table. "This is not your concern. Return to your duties immediately or face disciplinary action." Emily looked like she was about to have a panic attack. "Mr. Grant," she said quickly, "I strongly advise against making any statements that could be construed as retaliatory." "I don't need advice from you either," Grant snapped, his composure shattered. "This is a board decision, and everyone else needs to remember their place." The phrase created a collective intake of breath. In the context of a predominantly white board removing a black CEO and threatening diverse employees, those words would echo in courtrooms and headlines. Anya watched the meltdown with the detached interest of a scientist. Every word, every gesture, every lost control was being recorded by her phone and dozens of others. News vans arrived on the street below. Caldwell noticed and his face went ashen. How did they, social media? Marcus posted about it 20 minutes ago, Anya said simply. Hannah shared it to her LinkedIn network. David tagged 3 financial journalists. In the digital age, Mr. Caldwell, transparency isn't optional. The chairman looked around, his world collapsing. The careful, quiet removal had become an epic public relations disaster. Employees were openly filming. Dr. Sharma, Caldwell said, a note of desperation now in his voice, perhaps we should reconsider the timeline for this transition. But Anya shook her head. Oh no, Mr. Caldwell, you said this was about values, about tradition, about understanding how things work here. I think everyone should see exactly what those values look like in practice. She glanced at her phone and smiled. ETA 5 minutes. IR. The cavalry was about to arrive. At exactly 4:17 p.m., the executive elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal attorney Isabella Rossi, senior partner at Sterling and Associates, one of the most feared civil rights attorneys in the Midwest. She was followed by 2 associates carrying bankers' boxes and briefcases. Simultaneously, every board member's phone buzzed with the same incoming email from the Securities and Exchange Commission, copied to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Gentlemen, Isabella announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dismantling institutional power. I'm here representing Dr. Sharma in what appears to be a discriminatory termination proceeding. The words hit like a physical force. Caldwell's face drained as he read the email. A formal notice of investigation into potential violations of federal employment law, banking regulations, and corporate governance. Grant's hands shook. This is premature. We haven't even finalized. Oh, but you have, Isabella interrupted, opening one of her briefcases with theatrical precision. We have 47 recorded minutes of this meeting, thanks to Dr. Sharma's foresight in documenting today's proceedings. She placed a digital recorder on the table, its red light blinking. Every word, every threat, every discriminatory statement has been preserved for review by federal regulators and, if necessary, a jury of Dr. Sharma's peers. Miller's voice cracked. This is entrapment. She can't record private board meetings. Actually, Isabella responded with a smile that could cut glass, Illinois is a one-party consent state. Dr. Sharma was legally entitled to record any conversation she participated in. More importantly, as CEO, she was exercising her fiduciary duty to document potential misconduct by board members. The legal implications hit like a series of explosions. Caldwell realized every careless word, every coded phrase, every moment of veiled bias had been captured. But the real bombshell came when Isabella's associate opened the first banker's box, removing a thick manila folder marked Sharma Investments, LLC. Gentlemen, Isabella continued, I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about Dr. Sharma's relationship with this institution. She opened the folder to reveal stock certificates, ownership documents, and corporate filings. Dr. Sharma isn't just the CEO of Sterling Trust Bank, Isabella announced. Through her family's investment vehicle, Sharma Investments, she is the largest individual shareholder, controlling 35% of the bank's equity. The silence was deafening. Grant's face went through a spectrum of colors before settling on green. Miller gasped audibly. Caldwell looked like he'd seen a ghost. Furthermore, Isabella continued, clearly enjoying the moment, Dr. Sharma is the daughter of the late Senator John Sharma, who was instrumental in the bank's founding, and whose estate still holds significant influence over the institution's charter and federal banking licenses. The revelation hit like a tsunami. Senator Sharma had been a civil rights icon whose political influence shaped banking policy for decades. The idea that they'd been casually dismissing his daughter, a woman with both legal standing and institutional power, made their behavior not just morally reprehensible, but strategically catastrophic. Anya finally spoke, her voice calm as still water. Gentlemen, I think we need to have a different conversation about the future of Sterling Trust Bank. Through the glass, employees grew silent, sensing a monumental shift. News crews outside positioned for what they now understood was a significant story. And in the boardroom, 3 men who thought they held all the power began to understand they'd just made the kind of mistake that ends careers and destroys institutions. The revelation transformed the boardroom into a courtroom where the verdict was already rendered. Caldwell sat frozen, staring at the ownership documents as if willing them to disappear. Anya didn't just work for Sterling Trust Bank, she effectively owned it. Isabella continued her methodical destruction of the board's position. The ownership structure means that any termination of Dr. Sharma would require shareholder approval, specifically including the approval of Sharma Investments. Since Dr. Sharma controls Sharma Investments, she let the sentence hang, allowing them to absorb the full implications. This is impossible, Grant whispered, barely audible. Would you? Isabella asked, removing another document. Because your own legal counsel advised you 6 months ago that any personnel decisions regarding Dr. Sharma should be reviewed by the full shareholder registry. You chose to ignore that advice. The document she placed on the table was a memo from the bank's law firm, dated 6 months ago, clearly outlining the complexity of Anya's position and recommending extreme caution. It was stamped received and initialed by all three board members. Miller's voice cracked. We thought the family trust, we didn't realize the ownership had transferred. Oh, but you did realize, Isabella corrected, pulling out a series of emails between board members. These communications, obtained through Dr. Sharma's legitimate access to board correspondence, show that you've been discussing ways to minimize the Sharma influence for over a year. The emails, projected onto the screen, painted a devastating picture of deliberate discrimination. Words like uppity, not our kind of people, and overstepping boundaries appeared throughout. Caldwell finally found his voice, little more than a croak. This changes things. Perhaps we were hasty. Hasty? Anya laughed, sharp and crystalline. Mr. Caldwell, you've spent the last hour explaining that I don't belong here, that I don't understand your values, that I should find somewhere more suitable for my kind. Now you want to suggest you were merely hasty? The room's atmosphere became suffocating. Through the glass, federal agents arrived, representatives from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, here to investigate potential banking regulation violations. The federal investigation will be thorough, Isabella explained with professional detachment. Discriminatory practices by bank leadership constitute violations of fair lending laws, equal employment regulations, and corporate governance requirements. The penalties can include personal liability for board members. Grant's hands shook as he reached for his phone. I need to call my attorney. You'll need several attorneys, Isabella corrected. Employment law, banking regulation, securities law, and possibly criminal defense. If the investigation uncovers deliberate violations of federal statutes, the mention of criminal liability caused a visible physical reaction. Miller slumped, aged a decade. Grant's breathing became rapid and shallow. Caldwell stared out the window at the growing crowd of protesters supporting Anya. Dr. Sharma, Caldwell said, his voice hollow with defeat. What do you want? The question hung in the air like a white flag of surrender. Anya looked around at these men who, an hour ago, were confident in their power. Now they understood they'd awakened something far larger. What I want, Anya said, standing and walking to the window where protesters held signs reading Justice for Dr. Sharma and End Banking Discrimination, is what I've always wanted. A financial institution that serves all of its community with dignity, respect, and equality. She turned back to the board, her expression serene but implacable. The question is whether you gentlemen will be part of that future, or whether you'll be remembered only as obstacles to progress who were removed when they became irrelevant. The choice was theirs, but everyone understood the real power had already shifted permanently. 6 months later, Sterling Trust Bank looked dramatically different. The boardroom that once resembled an exclusive men's club now hosted meetings reflecting Chicago's diversity. Portraits of stern-faced founders were joined by images celebrating the bank's community impact. Loan ceremonies in historically redlined neighborhoods, scholarship presentations to first-generation college students, partnerships with minority-owned businesses. Anya stood at the same windows where she once faced discrimination, but now addressed a packed auditorium for the bank's first annual Community Impact Summit. The audience included small business owners, city council members, university students, and senior citizens who remembered when banks like Sterling Trust wouldn't serve people like them. Change, Anya said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly, is never comfortable for those who benefit from the status quo. But change is essential for institutions that want to remain relevant in a world that's constantly evolving. The audience applauded. I didn't return to this position to seek revenge against those who wronged me. I returned because I believe deeply that financial institutions have a responsibility to serve all members of their community with equal dignity and opportunity. Behind her, a screen displayed the bank's new statistics: a 400% increase in loans to minority owned businesses, a 250% increase in first time homebuyer mortgages in traditionally underserved areas, and a customer satisfaction rating leading the region. More importantly, profits had increased by 60% while maintaining the highest employee retention rate in its history. The changes we've implemented weren't about political correctness or social messaging, Anya continued. They were about sound business practices that recognize talent and opportunity wherever they exist. When you expand your definition of who deserves a chance, you expand your possibilities for success. In the audience, Lucas Morales sat with his new title of Vice President of Community Development. Hannah Lee had been promoted to Senior Trust Officer. Dr. Lena Khalil now headed the bank's international division. The employees who stood with Anya had their loyalty rewarded. But perhaps the most important lesson, Anya said, her voice growing stronger, is that dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not earned through compliance or silence. Every person who walks through these doors, whether as an employee, a customer, or a partner, deserves to be treated with the full measure of human dignity. She paused, looking at the diverse crowd. Some of you have faced discrimination in your careers, in your communities, in your pursuit of the American dream. You've been told you don't belong, that you don't fit, that you should lower your expectations or find somewhere else to chase your ambitions. The silence in the auditorium was complete. I'm here to tell you that you belong wherever your talents and dedication can take you. The question isn't whether you're worthy of opportunity. The question is whether institutions are worthy of your contribution. The applause was thunderous. Sterling Trust Bank had committed $50 million over the next 5 years to community development, education, and entrepreneurship programs. But money alone doesn't create change. People do. Each of you has the power to demand better, to expect more, to refuse to accept that's just how things are as an answer to inequality. Anya reflected on her journey. The boardroom confrontation that could have ended her career instead became the catalyst for institutional transformation. Discrimination became the foundation for policies protecting others. The attempt to silence her voice amplified it beyond anything conventional success could achieve. The future, she concluded, belongs to institutions brave enough to embrace change and individuals courageous enough to demand it. Together, we're not just building a better bank, we're building a better community and ultimately a better society. Back in her office, the walls displayed thank you letters from families who bought first homes, photos from small business openings, and articles about the Sterling Trust model being adopted nationwide. But the most meaningful item was a handwritten note from a young Black woman. Dr. Sharma, because of your courage, I'm not afraid to demand the respect I deserve. Thank you for showing me that belonging isn't something I need to earn. It's something I have the right to claim. The transformation of Sterling Trust Bank became a case study taught in business schools, analyzed in legal journals, and cited in corporate diversity training programs. For Anya, the real measure of success wasn't headlines or awards, but individual lives changed by access to institutions seeing potential rather than prejudice. The federal investigation resulted in sweeping changes across the banking industry. Caldwell, Grant, and Miller faced personal liability. Caldwell served 6 months in federal prison for banking regulation violations. Their removal sent shockwaves through corporate America, clarifying that executive-level discrimination would face serious consequences. But punishment was never Anya's goal. The real victory lay in systematic changes, ensuring her experience becomes increasingly impossible to repeat. New regulations required diverse representation on bank boards, federal oversight of employment practices strengthened. The business case for inclusion was proven so conclusively that even the most reluctant institutions could no longer ignore it. As Anya prepared to leave her office, she looked out at a Chicago skyline full of possibility. In boardrooms across the city, women and people of color were taking seats where they were once unwelcome. In lending offices, loan officers approved mortgages for families who would have been redlined. In university classrooms, business students learned that diversity wasn't a burden, but an asset. The story that began with the words, "You don't belong here," had become a narrative of transformation that extended far beyond one person or one institution. It was proof that standing up to injustice doesn't just protect the individual, it creates space for everyone who comes after. Every person reading this story, Anya thought, has a choice to make. Will you accept systems that diminish your worth, or will you demand institutions that recognize your value? Will you stay silent when you witness discrimination, or will you use your voice to create change? These questions weren't rhetorical. They were a challenge extending beyond the financial industry to every workplace, every community, every situation where power is used to exclude rather than include. Standing at the elevator that once carried her to humiliation but now represented triumph, Anya understood her individual victory was meaningless unless it became part of a larger movement toward justice. The courage to demand respect, the persistence to document injustice, the wisdom to build coalitions, and the vision to create lasting change. These tools are available to anyone willing to use them. The doors closed, beginning her descent from the 32nd floor, but the elevation of her cause continued to rise. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't revenge. It's simply being who you are unapologetically and refusing to let anyone convince you that you belong anywhere other than exactly where your talents can make the greatest impact. The revolution begins with a single person saying no to discrimination and yes to dignity. Today, tomorrow, and every day after, that person can be you.